In this video, we are going to discuss the difference between a dynamic backend and a service orchestration scenario. Both these scenarios are very common in DataPower and often a source of confusion. So, this video aims to clarify that. Let us talk about dynamic backend first. Imagine a client connecting with multi-protocol gateway, and you have several backends over here. The SIT backend belongs to SIT environment, UAT backend belongs to UAT, and prod backend belongs to production environment. Remember, at any given point in time, a multi-protocol gateway can connect with at max one backend. You have the scenario where, depending upon the environment, you got to route your call to the appropriate backend. So, a client request might look like this. Here, the environment variable is mentioned as SIT. In MPGW policy, there has to be some kind of logic which decides which backend to route to depending upon incoming request. The logic might look like this. In this scenario, you are dealing with a dynamic backend. In summary, a dynamic backend means the backend decided at runtime. It is not fixed at design time, but instead chosen at runtime. To choose a backend at runtime, you have to have some kind of criteria. That criteria must come from incoming request. It can be aided by a configuration file, but some hint must be present in the incoming transaction in order to decide which backend to route to. How the actual routing will take place? It takes place with the help of setting a variable called routing URL, as you can see on the bottom of this screen. This is called dynamic backend. Now let's talk about the service orchestration scenario. We have the same setup, client calling a multi-protocol gateway, and this time client wants to call the multi-protocol gateway to say transfer some money. It is the transfer service, which is the backend service, which will actually do the credit and debit transaction. However, before the money transfer could take place, the requirement is that this multi-protocol gateway processing policy should do some checks. Possibly, one check is to connect with account service, another check is to connect with fraud service, and then try to find out whether the accounts being used are active, whether this is some kind of fraud or not. Once all these checks are clean and green, then only pass on the call to transfer service. In this scenario, you have one single backend, which is transfer service. But before the transaction hits transfer service, you will have to call multiple services from within the processing rule, such as account service and fraud service. This is a scenario which is popularly known as service orchestration. So you are orchestrating among several services. At the end, your call goes to transfer service, but before it can go there, you have to reach out to account service and fraud service. This is service orchestration scenario, and it is achieved with the help of what we call DP-URL open. So DP-URL open construct is used within the multi-protocol gateway policy, in particular within the gateway script or XSLT, to call these services, get the result, and make that result available to the programmer. The programmer can then parse those results, understand it, and decide the future course of action. This is called service orchestration. In summary, the routing URL technique is used to connect with a backend. If it is used within XSLT or within the gateway script programming, consider that you are dealing with a dynamic backend. But if you use URL open construct in order to call a backend and then get the result back into your processing rule, consider that you are most likely dealing with the service orchestration scenario. That's it. Thank you.